There was a man who worked 40 years at the same company. He showed up on time, followed every rule, cashed every paycheck, and never once questioned the life he was living. He was not lazy. He was not stupid. By every measure, he was a good man who did everything society told him to do. And yet, on the day he retired, he had almost nothing to show for it. No wealth. No financial freedom. Just a gold watch and a quiet fear that he had somehow missed the point entirely. His story is not unusual. In fact, it is the story of the majority of people alive on this planet today. Millions of hardworking, intelligent, well-meaning human beings who spend their entire lives trading time for money, struggling to make ends meet, wondering why the math never seems to work out in their favor. They earn more and somehow spend more. They save and something always wipes it out. They try harder and yet the gap between where they are and where they want to be never seems to close. Bob Proctor spent decades studying this phenomenon. He did not look at it as an economic problem. He did not look at it as a social problem. He looked at it as a thinking problem. Because Bob Proctor understood something that very few people ever come to understand. The outer world of money and results is nothing more than a reflection of the inner world of thought and belief. The struggle is never really about money. It is about the invisible programming that has been operating silently in the background of every financial decision a person has ever made. What you are about to hear will not just change the way you think about money. It will change the way you think about yourself. And that, as Bob Proctor always said, is where everything begins. Bob Proctor was born into scarcity. He grew up in a household where money was tight, conversations about wealth were absent, and the future seemed like a narrow corridor with very few doors. By the time he was in his 20s, he had dropped out of high school, bounced between dead-end jobs, and accumulated debt that seemed insurmountable. On paper, there was nothing to suggest that this young man would go on to become one of the most respected teachers of prosperity and human potential the world has ever known. Then one day, someone handed him a copy of Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. That single book cracked open something inside of him that he had never known existed. He began to understand that his financial life was not a product of his circumstances. It was a product of his conditioning. The poverty he experienced on the outside was a direct expression of the poverty he had accepted on the inside. And if the inside could be changed, the outside would have no choice but to follow. Within a year of beginning his mental transformation, Bob Proctor had gone from earning $4,000 a year to earning over $100,000. Not because he found a better job. Not because the economy shifted. But because the person doing the thinking had fundamentally changed. He had reprogrammed his mind for abundance, and abundance had no choice but to respond. For the next 6 decades, Bob dedicated his life to teaching others the principles he had discovered. He worked with Earl Nightingale. He studied the works of Wallace Wattles, William James, and Thomas Troward. He distilled these timeless truths into practical wisdom that ordinary people could apply to their extraordinary lives. He traveled the world, filled arenas, and sat one-on-one with people who were suffering the same confusion he had once suffered himself. This video is drawn from his deepest teachings on money. Not tips. Not tactics. Not budget spreadsheets. What follows are the root causes, the real reasons why most people struggle with money, explained through the lens of the man who lived both sides of the equation and came back to tell the world what he found. Most people believe that what they consciously want is what drives their financial life. They set goals, make plans, create budgets, and tell themselves they are ready for more. But Bob Proctor taught that conscious intention is only the surface layer of a much deeper operation happening inside every human mind. The true driver of a person's financial results is what Bob called the paradigm, a multitude of habits and beliefs fixed in the subconscious mind that operate automatically, 24 hours a day, regardless of what the conscious mind desires. The paradigm was built long before the person was old enough to evaluate what was being placed inside them. By the age of 7, most of the core financial programming is already in place, absorbed from parents, teachers, relatives, and the culture at large. Child who grows up hearing, money doesn't grow on trees, or, we can't afford that, or, rich people are greedy, is not just learning phrases. That child is downloading a financial operating system that will quietly govern every money-related decision for the rest of their life. When a person reaches adulthood and tries to pursue financial success while still running that old programming, they experience what Bob described as an internal civil war. The conscious mind is reaching for more, while the subconscious mind is pulling everything back to what feels familiar. This is why people self-sabotage. Not because they are weak or foolish, but because the paradigm is designed to maintain consistency. It does not know the difference between a belief that serves you and a belief that destroys you. It only knows what is familiar. Bob often used the example of a thermostat. If the temperature in a room rises above the setting, the thermostat kicks in and cools it back down. The subconscious mind does the same thing with income. When earnings begin to rise above the internal set point, the paradigm creates circumstances that bring everything back to the baseline. This is why lottery winners so often end up broke within a few years. The money changed. The paradigm did not. And without a matching inner image of wealth, the outer wealth simply evaporates. Understanding the paradigm is not about blame or victimhood. It is about clarity. Once a person can see the mechanism that has been running in the background, they can begin the conscious work of changing it. Bob Proctor said it plainly, "You cannot change your financial life by changing your behavior alone. You must change the belief system that is generating the behavior. Everything else is cosmetic." Most people have never examined their emotional relationship with money. They think about money constantly, worry about it endlessly, and work hard to obtain it, but they have never sat down and asked themselves what they actually feel about money at a deep, visceral level. Bob Proctor taught that feelings are the language of the subconscious mind. And whatever feeling a person has attached to money is the message their subconscious mind receives and acts upon every single day. If money triggers fear, the subconscious mind will treat money as a threat and create behavior that keeps it at a distance. If money triggers guilt, the person will unconsciously find ways to give it away, lose it, or spend it before it can accumulate. If money triggers shame, the person will sabotage every opportunity to receive it. These emotional associations were installed by experience. The parent who stressed about bills. The church that preached that money was the root of all evil. The society that silently implied that wanting wealth was selfish or materialistic. None of these messages were delivered maliciously. They were passed down by people who received the same programming themselves. But the impact is real, and the impact is financial. Bob would often ask audiences to complete the sentence, "Money is ____." The answers were revealing. Dirty. Stressful. Hard to get. Dangerous. The root of all evil. These were not random words. They were windows into the subconscious belief system that had been quietly running the show. The antidote is not positive thinking in the shallow sense of the word. It is a genuine, sustained effort to build a new emotional relationship with money, one rooted in love, gratitude, and appreciation rather than fear, guilt, or shame. Bob taught that money is simply an idea. It is neutral. It has no moral charge of its own. The energy a person places around money is entirely their own creation, and it can be recreated. When a person begins to feel good about money, when they begin to see it as a tool for good, a reflection of value given and received, a positive force in their life, the subconscious mind begins to lower its defenses and allow money to flow more freely. The emotional work is not soft work. It is, as Bob would say, the hardest and most important work a person can do. Because until the feeling changes, the financial results cannot sustainably change. The most widely accepted model of financial life in modern civilization is the time for money exchange. You show up, you work, you get paid. The harder you work, the more hours you put in, the more you earn. It seems logical. It seems fair. But Bob Proctor called it one of the most limiting ideas ever installed in the human mind. The fundamental flaw of the time for money model is that time is finite. Every human being has the same 24 hours in a day. When your income is entirely dependent on your hours, your income is capped by a ceiling that can never be broken without a shift in the model itself. Bob distinguished between two types of income. The first is linear income. You work, you get paid. You stop working, the money stops. The second is what he called leveraged or residual income, systems, investments, and creative works that continue to generate money long after the initial effort has been made. Wealthy people understand this distinction intimately. They build assets. They create systems. They invest in things that work while they sleep. The financially struggling, on the other hand, have been conditioned to believe that hard physical labor is the only legitimate path to earning. This belief is not accidental. Bob was blunt about this. An entire economic system benefits from a large population that trades time for money and never questions whether another model is available. An employee who believes they must work harder to earn more will never stop working harder. The shift from linear to leveraged thinking is not primarily a financial strategy. It is a psychological shift. It requires a person to believe that they deserve to earn money in ways that are not directly tied to physical effort, and for many people, that belief runs directly against everything they were taught. Bob often quoted Wallace Wattles, who wrote that a person must move from the competitive plane to the creative plane. Competition keeps people fighting over existing slices of the pie. Creativity expands the pie itself. This does not mean that hard work is irrelevant. Bob worked tirelessly throughout his life. But the direction of that work was always toward building something that would outlast any single hour of effort. He was always working toward leverage, not just labor. The question Bob would have every student ask themselves is this: if you stopped working today, how long would money continue to come in? The answer to that question reveals exactly how deeply the time for money trap has taken hold. The path out of the trap begins with a decision, a genuine, non-negotiable decision that a different financial model is not only possible but is the model you are committed to building. That decision alone begins to shift the paradigm. Bob Proctor taught one of the most powerful and least discussed truths in all of personal development. A person can never outperform their self-image. The image a person holds of themselves in their own mind acts as an invisible boundary that no amount of effort can permanently push past. The self-image is not what a person says about themselves. It is what they genuinely believe at the deepest level. And for most people, that belief was shaped by a lifetime of outside voices rather than inner truth. A person who sees themselves as not the type who has money will confirm that identity in every financial choice they make. They will avoid opportunities that seem too big for them. They will undercharge for their services. They will spend money as fast as it arrives because having too much feels inconsistent with who they believe themselves to be. Bob spent enormous time teaching people how to build a new self-image, not through arrogance or false confidence, but through a clear-eyed decision about who they were choosing to become. He called this the study of the self. The self-image is housed in the subconscious mind. It was built through repetition, through thousands of small messages repeated over time until they calcified into belief. And it can be rebuilt the same way, through new messages, repeated consistently, until a new identity takes hold. This is the true purpose of affirmations and visualization when used correctly, not wishful thinking, but the deliberate construction of a new self-concept that aligns with the financial life a person intends to create. Bob would often instruct people to write down the person they intended to become and to read that description every single day with genuine feeling. Not because the reading itself creates change, but because repetition with emotion is the mechanism through which the subconscious mind accepts new programming. The resistance people feel when doing this work is itself evidence of the old image pushing back. The discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that the new image is beginning to collide with the old one, and that collision is necessary for transformation. When the self-image shifts, behavior shifts automatically. A person who genuinely sees themselves as wealthy does not need to force themselves to make smart financial decisions. Those decisions flow naturally from the identity they have stepped into. Bob often said, "If you want to know what a person believes about themselves, look at their bank account. It is not a judgment. It is a mirror. And like any mirror, it shows exactly what is standing in front of it." Fear is perhaps the single greatest financial enemy that most people will ever face. Not the fear of failure alone, but a deeper, more pervasive fear that there is not enough money, not enough opportunity, not enough time, not enough for everyone to win. Bob Proctor called this operating on the scarcity frequency. When a person is vibrating at the frequency of lack, they quite literally cannot perceive the opportunities that exist around them. Their awareness is tuned to what is missing, and so what is missing is all they see. This is not metaphor. It is the function of the reticular activating system in the human brain, the mechanism that filters the millions of pieces of information available at any moment and surfaces only what the mind has been told to look for. A mind tuned to scarcity finds scarcity everywhere. A mind tuned to abundance finds abundance everywhere. Fear also drives terrible financial decisions. The person who operates from fear hoards money rather than investing it, avoids risk to the point of stagnation, and makes choices from a place of desperation rather than vision. Bob taught that the antidote to fear is not courage in the conventional sense. It is understanding. When a person truly understands the laws that govern the universe, particularly the law of vibration and the law of attraction, fear loses its grip because they can see the mechanism behind their results. He was fond of pointing out that wealthy people are not braver than struggling people. They simply operate from a different set of beliefs. They have been conditioned to see money as abundant, opportunity as endless, and themselves as capable. That conditioning produces confidence, not the other way around. The shift from scarcity to abundance begins with gratitude, genuine, heartfelt appreciation for what already exists. Gratitude is the highest frequency emotion available to a human being, and sustained gratitude is one of the most powerful tools for recalibrating the internal frequency from lack to abundance. Bob also emphasized the importance of giving. Nothing breaks the grip of scarcity consciousness faster than a generous act performed from a place of joy rather than obligation. Giving signals to the subconscious mind that there is enough, more than enough, and that belief begins to reshape financial reality. The person operating from fear will always find reasons not to invest, not to start, not to give, not to grow. Every reason feels justified. But the reasons are not the cause. The fear is the cause, and until the fear is addressed at its root, the reasons will keep multiplying. Bob's message was always ultimately a message of love, love of life, love of self, love of the infinite creative capacity available to every human being. And he believed, with every fiber of his being, that the move from fear to love was the most important financial move a person could ever make. Bob Proctor was not interested in financial tips. He was interested in principles. Specifically, the universal laws that govern the flow of money just as surely as gravity governs the fall of an apple from a tree. These laws do not care about a person's background, education, or past. They operate for everyone, always, without exception. The first law Bob pointed to was the law of vibration. Everything in the universe, including money, including thought, including the human body, is in a constant state of vibration. Money flows toward people who are vibrating at a frequency that is in harmony with it, and flows away from those who are not. This is not mysticism. It is the practical observation that a person whose thoughts, feelings, and beliefs are aligned with wealth will make the decisions, take the actions, and maintain the attitude that consistently attracts wealth. And a person whose inner world is dominated by lack will consistently repel it. The second law is the law of attraction, one of the most widely discussed and most widely misunderstood laws in the modern world. Bob spent decades clarifying what this law actually means. It is not about wishing for things. It is about becoming the kind of person whose habitual thoughts and feelings are in resonance with what they desire. The law of attraction is always working. It does not take days off. It does not discriminate. It simply responds to the dominant vibration a person is broadcasting. And most people, without realizing it, are broadcasting the frequency of what they fear rather than the frequency of what they want. The third law Bob emphasized was the law of cause and effect, the oldest and most reliable law known to humanity. For every financial result that exists in a person's life, there is a corresponding cause in their thinking. Change the cause, and the effect must change. This is not philosophy. It is physics. The law of increase, sometimes called the law of growth, teaches that energy always flows toward that which is praised and appreciated. When a person focuses on what they have with genuine gratitude, that which they have increases. When they focus on what they lack with anxiety, the lack increases. Bob also taught the law of compensation, the principle that a person is always compensated in direct proportion to the need they fill, how well they fill it, and how many people they serve. Increasing income, therefore, is not about working harder. It is about expanding the value delivered and the number of people reached. What makes these laws so frustrating for most people is that they are invisible. They cannot be seen or touched, only experienced through results. And because most people have never been taught that these laws exist, they interpret their financial results as luck, circumstance, or the favor of others rather than the inevitable output of their own inner world. Bob Proctor's life's work was to make these invisible laws visible, to give people the map they never received and show them that the territory of their financial life is far more navigable than they ever imagined. Bob Proctor believed in the absolute power of a made-up mind. Not a hopeful mind. Not a trying mind. A decided mind. And he taught that most people never truly decide to be wealthy. They wish for it. They work toward it. But they never make the kind of irreversible, life-altering decision that sets the transformation in motion. Real decision, in Bob's framework, is a cutting off of all other alternatives. The word itself comes from the Latin decidere, to cut away. When a person truly decides, they are not keeping a backup plan that allows for failure. They are burning the boats and committing to a new way of being. Most people resist this level of commitment because it feels dangerous. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail? But Bob consistently pointed out that the risk of a fully committed life is far smaller than the guaranteed tragedy of a life lived in hesitation. Hesitation is not safety. It is slow-motion surrender. The decision to be wealthy is not a decision about money. It is a decision about identity. It is the moment a person says, with total conviction, not bravado, "I am the kind of person who creates wealth. That is who I am. That is who I have decided to become." And from that moment, everything they see, hear, and think begins to be filtered through that identity. Bob was deeply influenced by the work of William James, who wrote that the greatest revolution of his generation was the discovery that human beings could alter the outer aspects of their lives by altering the inner attitudes of their minds. A decision is the act of altering the inner attitude. The outer life has no choice but to follow. After the decision comes the goal, a clear, specific, written image of the financial life being created. Not a vague wish, but a vivid, emotionally charged picture that the subconscious mind can begin to move toward. Bob was meticulous about the written goal. He believed it was one of the most powerful physical acts a person could perform. The goal must be written in the present tense, as if it already exists. Not, "I will earn," but, "I am earning." Not, "I hope to have," but, "I am grateful for." This is not deception. It is the language the subconscious mind understands, and it is the way every great goal is ultimately impressed into the deeper mind. Alongside the goal comes the study. Bob was a relentless student throughout his life. He read the same books hundreds of times, not because he had forgotten them, but because each reading revealed new layers of understanding. He taught his students that the material does not change between readings, you change, and therefore you see it differently. Financial education, to Bob, was not a one-time event. It was a lifelong practice. Then comes the action, inspired, purposeful, consistent action taken from a place of confidence rather than desperation. Bob distinguished between action that comes from fear and action that comes from faith. Fear-based action is frantic, exhausting, and often counterproductive. Faith-based action is focused, energized, and magnetically attractive. Bob Proctor's final teaching on this subject was always the same. It was not complicated. It was not revolutionary in its words. But it was devastating in its simplicity. You already have everything you need to create the financial life you desire. The resources are not the obstacle. The thinking is. Change the thinking and the world changes with it. There is something remarkable about the life of Bob Proctor that goes beyond the wealth he created or the stages he filled. It is the fact that he began exactly where you might be right now, confused, struggling, and completely unaware that the problem was never outside of him. He did not have advantages. He did not have connections or degrees or a privileged starting line. What he had was a book, a decision, and the willingness to keep going until the inner world had been so thoroughly transformed that the outer world had no choice but to match it. That is the gift he spent his life passing on to anyone willing to receive it. The teachings in this video are not motivational decoration. They are a map. And maps only have value when they are used. If there is one thing Bob Proctor would want you to take from everything you have just heard, it is this: do not wait until you believe it completely. Start before you believe it. Study your way into belief. Act your way into confidence. Repeat the new ideas until they feel more real than the old ones. This is not a shortcut. It is the only cut. The transformation is available to everyone, and it is waiting for you on the other side of a single, committed decision. Bob Proctor passed from this world in February of 2022, but the principles he taught are as alive today as they have ever been. They were not his invention. He was always clear about that. He was a student and a messenger, pointing back to the eternal laws that have always governed human experience. The money is there. The opportunity is there. The only question that remains, the only question that has ever mattered, is whether you are willing to do the inner work to become the person who receives it. That work begins now. It begins with you. And it begins with a single thought, chosen deliberately, that says, "I am more than my past. My best financial life is not behind me. It is waiting for me to step into it."